I don't believe that, from the language at least, that the death was intentional, but very likely came as a result of the McCanns anesthetizing the child in order for them to go out to a dinner party with friends.
The night of May 3rd, 2007, in a quiet holiday resort in Portugal, became one of the most haunting mysteries of our time. Madeleine McCann, a 3-year-old girl with bright eyes and a smile that captured hearts across the world, vanished from her family's apartment while her parents dined with friends just a short distance away. For years, the narrative has been dominated by one single idea, that Madeleine was abducted by an unknown intruder. But beneath the surface of official statements and media campaigns lies a thread of language that refuses to be silenced. At the center of this story is not only the disappearance itself, but also the words spoken afterward, words that, according to experts, reveal more than the parents ever intended. One sentence uttered by Gerry McCann during an interview has echoed through the years with chilling weight. Madeleine died in the apartment by accident and we hid her body. Was this simply a slip of the tongue or something far more revealing? For statement analyst Peter Hyatt, with decades of experience uncovering deception through language, this was not a mistake in grammar or a clumsy phrase. It was what he calls an embedded confession, a fragment of truth slipping past conscious control. And once such words are spoken, they cannot be taken back. They live on as linguistic fingerprints of reality. To understand the gravity of this case, we must step into the world of statement analysis, where pronouns, verb tenses, and unnecessary details become clues more powerful than body language or facial expressions. Because language, unlike masks we wear for the public, emerges directly from memory, emotion, and truth. And in the McCann case, the truth seems to have surfaced in words the parents never meant to reveal. When Gerry McCann was asked about accusations that he and Kate had been involved in their daughter's disappearance, an innocent father might have been expected to respond with a sharp, direct denial, something as simple as, "No, I didn't." Short, strong, and unshakable. Instead, Gerry offered a narrative. He said Madeleine died in the apartment, that it was an accident, and that we hid her body. Each part of that statement is deeply troubling. Why speak of death at all unless it was in his mind? Why introduce the idea of an accident when no one else had suggested it? And why volunteer the detail of hiding a body unless the subconscious truth was pushing its way to the surface? For Peter Hyatt, this was not speculation. It was leakage, the phenomenon when suppressed knowledge breaks through under pressure, creating what analysts call an embedded confession. Language is not neutral. Words carry weight shaped by memory, instinct, and fear. When people lie, their control over language is never absolute. Unlike rehearsed body language or a forced expression, words flow faster than conscious editing. Under stress, a person's subconscious mind often provides vocabulary from hidden knowledge, creating slips that betray reality. Even a single verb can expose truth. Gerry once included the word "fell in his denial." Parents who believe their child was abducted plead desperately for help, focusing on fear and urgency. They do not create alternate scenarios. Yet Gerry reached for "fell," a verb that aligns with the possibility of an accidental death inside the apartment. Then there is the pronoun "we." Gerry did not say "I hid her body," but "we hid her body." Pronouns are instinctive, chosen unconsciously millions of times in everyday speech. They reveal unity, cooperation, and shared responsibility. In that one syllable, Gerry implicated not only himself, but also Kate. An innocent person does not intuitively place themselves in a crime they did not commit, nor do they include another in guilt they do not share. That single word, "we," becomes a bond of shared action, a linguistic fingerprint that resists deliberate manipulation. For Hyatt, this was one of the clearest examples he had ever studied. Gerry's words were not slips of grammar or mistranslations. They were confessions, pieces of a truth too heavy to conceal forever. If Gerry's words carried the weight of an embedded confession, Kate's language revealed something more subtle, yet equally unsettling. During interviews, Kate often spoke of Madeleine in the past tense. She said her daughter was very tired, that she cuddled on her knee, that it was just a usual night. For statement analysts, tense is crucial. Innocent parents of missing children cling desperately to the present. She is missing. She needs us. She is out there. The present tense sustains hope and reflects a refusal to accept death without proof. To slip into the past tense, especially so soon, often betrays an unconscious recognition of finality. Kate also fixated on unnecessary details. She described brushing teeth, reading a story, offering a treat, steps of a bedtime routine recited like a checklist. These details add nothing to the timeline of Madeleine's disappearance. Instead, they appear to serve an internal need, to present Madeleine as safely cared for, to normalize a night that was anything but normal. Analysts note that parents who medicate their children to sleep often overcompensate in their descriptions, emphasizing ordinary routines to mask extraordinary circumstances. Another troubling sign was Kate's insistence that it was just an ordinary night. Innocent parents rarely stressed normality because for them, the night was routine until the disappearance shattered it. To insist so strongly on normality, however, suggests an awareness of abnormal choices. It betrays the very fact that something unusual had taken place. And then there was the way she described discovering Madeleine gone. Kate painted a cinematic picture, the curtains billowing, the window open, the sudden realization that Madeleine had been taken. But innocent parents confronted with an empty bed do not instantly declare abduction. Their first instincts are to search, to call the child's name, to hope she has wandered nearby. Certainty of kidnapping requires evidence, an intruder's mark, a ransom note, or communication. For Kate to claim she just knew was to reveal foreknowledge, a knowledge inconsistent with innocence. To Hyatt, her words sounded less like a mother reliving trauma and more like someone reciting a script. The imagery, the certainty, the past tense, all combined to suggest that Kate was not describing memory, but constructing narrative. It was not confusion born of grief. It was performance born of concealment. Among the many theories surrounding Madeleine's disappearance, one has persisted with striking consistency: the possibility that she was medicated to sleep. For Peter Hyatt and other analysts, the language of both Gerry and Kate, combined with their professional backgrounds, gives weight to this chilling idea. Kate McCann was a trained anesthesiologist. She understood how to administer sedatives, how they affect consciousness, and how delicate the balance must be to avoid lethal consequences. Hyatt suggests that on the night Madeleine vanished, the McCanns may have wanted their children to remain asleep so they could enjoy dinner with friends without interruption. To outsiders, the very thought is horrifying. But to parents under stress, particularly those with medical knowledge, administering something to keep a child drowsy might have seemed manageable, even routine. Yet sleep induction with children is never safe. Dosages are unpredictable, side effects dangerous. A child who wakes under sedation may be disoriented, unstable, or physically vulnerable. Hyatt believes this may explain Gerry's odd use of the word fell. If Madeleine, despite sedation, awoke and tried to find her parents, she could have stumbled, fallen, or struck her head, with tragic consequences. Kate's repeated emphasis that Madeleine was very tired and cuddled on my knee fits the same pattern. Analysts note that when parents medicate children, they often describe them euphemistically as simply tired or peaceful, avoiding any hint of chemical involvement. Her insistence that it was a usual night further suggests an effort to normalize what was in fact an extraordinary and dangerous choice. The theory also explains why Kate moved immediately to the idea of abduction, bypassing the natural instincts of search and hope. If Madeleine had truly died in an accident linked to sedation, then the parents faced not only unbearable grief, but also professional ruin, criminal liability, and the loss of their other children. To protect themselves, they needed a different story, and so abduction became the narrative. Hyatt is careful to stress that this theory does not point to deliberate murder. Instead, it suggests recklessness, negligence, and a catastrophic outcome. A shortcut taken for convenience may have ended in irreversible tragedy. In this light, the abduction narrative was not an expression of hope, but a shield against exposure. One of the most striking differences between innocent parents and deceptive ones lies not only in what they admit, but in where they place their focus. Innocent parents, desperate and terrified, cannot help but center their words on their missing child. Their language bursts with empathy and urgency. She must be hungry. She is cold. Please bring her back. Every sentence reflects the child's suffering and their own frantic desire to end it. The McCanns, however, consistently did the opposite. Their statements often revolved around themselves, their reputations, their careers, their innocence. Instead of pleading for Madeleine's safety, Gerry emphasized the exact distance between their apartment and the restaurant where they dined, 49.4 meters. He recited the number like a legal defense, as though proximity could absolve them of negligence. This was the language of calculation, not grief. It sounded less like a father crying out for his daughter, and more like a defendant rehearsing for judgment. Kate, too, stressed how painful it was to be judged by rumors, how unfair it felt to be under suspicion, how exhausted they were. Their interviews were filled with logical explanations, how often they checked on the children, how responsible they had been, how their professional status as doctors proved their integrity. These are arguments designed for public opinion and courtroom credibility, not pleas for a child's rescue. Hyatt highlights that what people choose to talk about is what matters most to them. If parents emphasize their child's needs, it is because they truly believe their child is out there, suffering and waiting. If parents emphasize their own reputations, it is because they know the child is no longer in danger, and the real threat lies in exposure, not abduction. The absence of empathy from Madeleine was deafening. There were no pleas about whether she was cold, no wondering if she cried for her mother in the dark, no desperate appeals for her comfort or safety. Instead, the focus remained on defending themselves. For Hyatt, this absence was not just unusual, it was the clearest indicator of guilty knowledge. From the earliest days of Madeleine's disappearance, the media played a decisive role in shaping how the world viewed the case. In the United Kingdom especially, newspapers and television outlets portrayed Kate and Gerry McCann as devoted parents, respectable doctors, and victims of a cruel abduction. Photographs of Madeleine's angelic smile were everywhere, and the public responded with waves of sympathy and financial support. But as time passed, cracks began to appear. Just as in the case of JonBenet Ramsey in the United States, the more the parents spoke publicly, the more unease grew among audiences. Their interviews lacked the raw, desperate energy of parents clinging to hope. Instead, their words often sounded rehearsed, defensive, and focused on clearing themselves of blame. People sensed a mismatch between their polished image and the language that betrayed self-interest. This unease eventually divided public opinion into polarized camps. On one side were the loyal supporters who clung to the abduction narrative and defended the McCanns with almost religious devotion. Entire groups emerged online and in communities, dedicated to silencing critics and attacking anyone who questioned the official story. Their defense was fierce, even hostile, as if acknowledging the possibility of parental guilt was too unbearable to face. For many, admitting that polished, educated parents could be responsible for such a tragedy was a thought too close to home. On the other side were the skeptics, viewers who once sympathized but grew suspicious as the inconsistencies mounted. They noticed the absence of emotional appeals for Madeleine, the overemphasis on legalistic details, and the strangely cinematic imagery used by Kate. They began to articulate what they felt in their gut, that something about the McCann story did not add up. Between these extremes lay millions of ambivalent observers, torn between compassion for grieving parents and a gnawing sense that the truth was being carefully managed. With every anniversary, every age progression photo, and every fundraising appeal, the divide deepened. What began as national sympathy evolved into a bitter public debate, one that revealed not only the mystery of Madeleine's fate, but also the limits of trust in media narratives. Peter Hyatt often reminds his students of a sobering truth. Deception always carries contempt. To lie is not only to hide something, it is to assume that others are too blind, too naive to see through the mask. This contempt, Hyatt argues, is woven throughout the McCann's words. In the early days, their language carried defensiveness, an almost anxious effort to explain themselves. But as the years passed and the abduction story was repeated again and again, something shifted. Their tone hardened. They began to speak with a kind of entitlement, as though the public owed them belief. What started as denial evolved into confidence and eventually into arrogance. This progression, Hyatt explains, is the tolerance of deception. When a lie is sustained long enough, guilt dulls and is replaced by a sense of control. The contempt became most visible in their fundraising campaigns. For years, new photos of how Madeleine might look as she aged were paired with renewed appeals for donations. To supporters, this was persistence. To critics, it was profiteering, an exploitation of tragedy to sustain a narrative that analysts believed to be false. Each appeal deepened the sense of insult among skeptics, who felt their compassion had been manipulated. Public reaction mirrored this contempt. Many who once sympathized began to feel not just doubtful, but angry. Angry at being misled, angry at being treated as passive spectators, angry at the possibility that their donations were built on deception. This anger was not just skepticism, it was indignation. The audience felt disrespected, and once trust collapses, it rarely returns. The cycle of contempt and resentment defined the relationship between the McCanns and the public. The more they controlled interviews, filtered questions, and presented polished performances, the more people sensed they were being managed rather than respected. And when an audience feels spoken down to, resistance grows. Hyatt sees this as inevitable. Deception cannot sustain respect, because it is rooted in disrespect. In the end, the tragedy of Madeleine's disappearance was compounded by another tragedy, the erosion of trust. What should have united a community in grief instead divided it into hostile camps, fueled by a mutual sense of contempt. The McCanns' contempt for their audience and the audience's contempt for them became a bitter legacy alongside the loss of a little girl. Among the most powerful tools in statement analysis are pronouns. Unlike carefully chosen words or rehearsed timelines, pronouns are instinctive. We use I, we, she, they millions of times without conscious thought. And because they are so deeply ingrained, they are almost impossible to manipulate under stress. For Peter Hyatt, pronouns are the fingerprints of truth. When Gerry McCann said, "Madeleine died in the apartment by accident and we hid her body," that single pronoun we carried enormous weight. If he were innocent, why not say they or some unknown person? If he were solely confessing, why not say I? Instead, he instinctively said we, binding himself and Kate together in the concealment. This was not a grammatical slip. It was a revelation of unity, of shared guilt. Innocent people do not place themselves in crimes they did not commit, nor do they drag others into guilt they don't share. That one syllable stands as one of the most damning pieces of linguistic evidence in the case. Kate's language, too, revealed troubling patterns. While she often centered her words on herself, she occasionally shifted into a collective voice, blending her account with Gerry's, even when the details were her own. This merging of identities is known as guilty association, a subconscious attempt to spread responsibility and blur individual accountability. Beyond pronouns, analysts detected repeated signs of leakage, details that slipped out unnecessarily, hinting at suppressed knowledge. Kate's fixation on brushing teeth, cuddling on her knee, or describing curtains billowing in the wind did not help reconstruct a timeline. Instead, they seemed to serve as overcompensations or as fragments of a staged narrative. Hyatt warns that leakage often betrays fabrication. Real memories are messy, fragmented, emotional. Stories designed to deceive are polished, cinematic, and filled with symbolic detail. More disturbingly, some analysts believe Kate may have leaked subconscious clues about where Madeleine's body was hidden. Though she never explicitly said it, her repeated references to certain places and routines raised questions. In other cases, linguistic leakage has led investigators to discover hidden remains, details about water, ditches, or roads unconsciously spoken by guilty parents later matched the actual burial sites of their children. Hyatt proposes that Kate's words may still contain such signposts, waiting to be mapped with rigorous analysis. Pronouns tell us who shared responsibility. Leakage hints at what really happened, and perhaps even where the truth still lies buried. Together, they paint not a picture of innocence, but of guilty knowledge slipping through the cracks of carefully constructed stories. To understand the McCann case more clearly, Peter Hyatt and other analysts often compare it to similar disappearances. These comparisons provide a baseline. They reveal how innocent parents typically speak when their child is missing, and how deceptive parents sound when they are concealing guilty knowledge. Take the case of Isabel Salis in Tucson, Arizona in 2012. When 6-year-old Isabel was reported missing, her father, Sergio, made a 911 call that immediately raised red flags. Instead of frantic urgency, pleading for officers to hurry or expressing fear for his daughter's safety. His tone was distant and oddly rehearsed. He offered justifications and explanations about circumstances, focusing more on how he might be perceived than on Isabel herself. Later investigations confirmed what his language had already revealed. Sergio was implicated in his daughter's disappearance. Contrast that with parents of genuinely abducted children. Their words almost always center on the child. They speak in the present tense. She is out there. She needs her blanket. She is waiting for us. They imagine what their child must be enduring: hunger, cold, fear, and they beg kidnappers for mercy. This child-centered urgency is instinctive, raw, and authentic. It reflects genuine ignorance of the child's fate and a desperate belief in survival. Another well-known comparison is the 1996 case of John Benet Ramsey in Boulder, Colorado. Public opinion was bitterly divided. Some believed the Ramseys staged their daughter's kidnapping, while others were convinced of an intruder. Yet even in their flawed statements, the Ramseys sometimes spoke of John Benet's suffering, using language that at least attempted to project empathy. By contrast, the McCanns displayed a far colder pattern. Their words almost never focused on Madeleine's needs. Instead, they revolved around logistics, reputations, and defenses. For Hyatt, this contrast is telling. Innocent parents, even under suspicion, cannot resist imagining their child's pain. Guilty parents, who already know their child is dead, instinctively redirect the focus toward themselves. The McCann case, when placed side by side with others, reveals its true character. It is not the language of frantic parents clinging to hope. It is the language of concealment, calculated, defensive, and self-centered. This is why the McCann interviews are now studied in training sessions for law enforcement and analysts. They are textbook examples of how guilty knowledge manifests, not in dramatic outbursts, but in subtle linguistic patterns that, once recognized, are impossible to ignore. After years of interviews, analyses, and debates, Peter Hyatt's conclusion remains unshaken. Madeleine McCann did not vanish into the night at the hands of a stranger. She died inside the apartment not through deliberate malice, but as the result of reckless choices, most likely linked to sedation and a tragic accident. For Hyatt, the evidence lies not in physical traces, which may never be recovered, but in the parents' own words. The embedded confession, "Madeleine died in the apartment by accident and we hid her body," stands as a linguistic fingerprint that cannot be erased. The past tense, the unnecessary details, the insistence on normality, the pronoun we, the cinematic imagery, the absence of empathy, all align into a consistent picture of guilty knowledge. These are not slips that grief alone can explain. They are signals of a truth the parents struggled to suppress. Yet, one haunting question remains: where is Madeleine? Despite searches, excavations, and countless theories, her body has never been found. This absence fuels the divide between hope and despair. For some, the age-progressed photographs offer a symbol of possibility, that perhaps she lives somewhere, waiting. For others, the linguistic evidence is undeniable. Madeleine never left the apartment alive. Hyatt acknowledges that language cannot dig in soil or drag a lake, but words endure when all else fades. The McCann's interviews, preserved in recordings and transcripts, continue to speak louder than any press conference or polished image. They reveal memory struggling against deception, guilt leaking through grammar, and a story constructed to protect not a child, but two parents. For the public, the lesson is sobering. Silence, Hyatt warns, is a form of complicity. To accept the abduction narrative without question is to let deception triumph over truth. Madeleine's story is not just about a missing child. It is about whether we are willing to confront the uncomfortable, to see through polished appearances, and to demand truth even when it hurts. In the end, the choice belongs to us. Will Madeleine's case remain another unresolved mystery buried beneath speculation and denial, or will her memory drive us to seek the truth, however painful it may be? One path offers silence, the other justice. And perhaps the only way to honor her life is to choose truth over silence, to remember her not as a symbol of hope deferred, but as a voice still speaking through the words her parents could never fully control.